Alright, hello everybody, this is Antonio Wolf. Continuing and finishing Franz Kafka's The Trial. Chapter 10. Very short chapter. Don't think there's anything much to say before this. I'll probably have a bit to say after it. But let's get it going. The evening before Kay's 31st birthday, it was about 9 o'clock in the evening, the time when the streets were quiet, two men came to where he lived. In frock coats, pale and fat, wearing top hats that looked like they could not be taken off their heads. After some brief formalities at the door of the flat when they first arrived, the same formalities were repeated at greater length at Kay's door. He had not been notified they would be coming, but Kay sat in a chair near the door, dressed in black as they were, and slowly put on new gloves which stretched tightly over his fingers and behaved as if he were expecting visitors. He immediately stood up and looked at the gentleman inquisitively. You've come for me then, have you? He asked. The gentleman nodded. One of them indicated the other with the top hat now in his hand. Kay told them he had been expecting a different visitor. He went to the window and looked once more down at the dark street. Most of the windows on the other side of the street were also dark already. Many of them had the curtains closed. In one of the windows on the same floor, where there was a light on, two small children could be seen playing with each other inside a playpen, unable to move from where they were, reaching out for each other with their little hands. Some ancient, unimportant actors. That's what they've sent for me, said Kay to himself, and looked round once again to confirm this to himself. They want to sort me out as cheaply as they can. Kay suddenly turned round to face the two men and asked, What theatre do you play in? Theatre? Asked one of the gentlemen, turning to the other for assistance and pulling in the corners of his mouth. The other made a gesture like someone who was dumb, as if he were struggling with some organism causing him trouble. You're not properly prepared to answer questions, said Kay, and went to fetch his hat. As soon as they were on the stairs, the gentleman wanted to take Kay's arms, but Kay said, Wait till we're in the street. I'm not ill. But they waited only until the front door before they took his arms in a way that Kay had never experienced before. They kept their shoulders close behind his. They did not turn their arms in, but twisted them around the entire length of Kay's arms, and took hold of his arms with a grasp that was formal, experienced, and could not be resisted. Kay was held stiff and upright between them. They formed now a single unit, so that if any one of them had been knocked down, all of them must have fallen. They formed a unit of the sort that normally can be formed only by matter that is lifeless. Alright, already. It's been a year since the trial began. And just as it was the morning that he turned 30 that he got arrested, it's the evening that he's about to turn 31. What is happening? See, it's 9 o'clock, man. Probably not meaningful, just late at night, or nearing late. Two men come, frock coats, pale and fat, wearing top hats that look like they could not be taken off their heads. So let me look up what a frock coat looks like. Alright, yep, formal attire. They were pale and fat. The pale makes sense. The fat, don't know what that means. Maybe it'll become clear. Top hats that looked like they could not be taken off their heads. So probably very tight hats. Kay's being weird, expecting someone, despite the fact he was not notified, but he dressed for the part. Dressed quite well. So he knows that they've come for him. Gentleman nodded. Kay said he had been expecting a different visitor, which I doubt, because he just expected someone probably, but who? It's not clear. Given the facts of how his trial has gone and what has happened in his life, plenty of weird things happened. Looking at the window down the street, most of the windows on the other side of the street were also dark already. Many of them had the curtains closed. In one of the windows on the same floor, where there was a light on, two small children could be seen playing with each other inside a playpen, unable to move from where they were, reaching out for each other with their little hands. That, to me, is the third instance of the image of alienation that we've gotten. We got in chapter 3 the painting in the judge's book. Then we got in chapter 7 the three paintings by Tittarelli of the trees. And here these two children, which is and this is probably the truest to his trial than the other images. The other images were, the first one is a man and a woman alienated from each other, sat in an awkward position on a couch where they couldn't communicate, or made it difficult to communicate. And the trees were just these, mute but sad-looking trees in a moorland landscape. And these being two small children playing with each other inside a playpen, unable to move from where they were, reaching out for each other with their little hands. Part of the issue has been that Kay has failed to mature as a person. As far as his psychology goes, he's very childish. So that's one part of representation. Two, they're separated. Those two children playing with each other inside a play, but unable to move from where they were, reaching out to each other with their little hands. Okay, I misinterpreted that. I misread that I misheard that as I was reading it. I thought they were separated by a playpen. No, they're in the playpen together and they're reaching out to each other with their little hands. Still works, except now that I was going to point out that this is an inversion, and this actually makes it even better. So this is the inverted image of alienation. Rather than keeping each other away, these children are in the same area and they're reaching out to each other, which is the only hope one has. It's to reach out to other people, which is what Kay has never done. And that children doing this is telling, because children don't have these built-up layers of defenses that adults do. And I don't think this is going to be a spoiler. If you even heard this book, you know the end. He's going to die. So he's on his way to his death. And what does he see? He sees a couple of children who are on the beginning of their life, and they're not committing the same mistake he has. So, interesting. And this is like where some of the most Gnostic stuff comes in as well. Life is a play. Some ancient, unimportant actors, that's what they've sent for me, said Kay to himself. They want to sort me out as cheaply as they can. And then he asks them, what theater do you play in? And they're kind of confused. They don't know how to answer. He says, you're not properly prepared to answer questions. Which doesn't surprise me. If we remember back to the first chapter, the arresting officers didn't know anything. They do their job, they do their duty. That's all they do. They're not paid to do anything else. They're not expected to do anything else, so they wouldn't know anything. And then the question Kay is asking is very bizarre, really. But at the same time, this is a strange intuition that Kay has in framing things this way, but he still has not figured out that how true this is, that this now is not only about Kay's trial. It is about trials as such. And since the trial is life, life is a play. Who's on trial ultimately? Who has put someone on trial? Because the usual interpretation is, okay, there's a trial. There are higher beings who put us on trial. I suppose I'll go into this into detail after we finish the chapter, which is not very far to read. It's only about 4 more pages. That the nature of the law makes this view impossible. That it's not that the law is over there above us and we're here, and poor us, we're on trial. The law itself is on trial through us. Which is what makes this ultimately comical. And this is a stronger metaphysical form of what Kay has intimations about his trial from the very beginning, that somehow he was the one who was in control. In that the trial is something he brought upon himself, and he had this intimation that if he could bring it upon himself, he could also get himself out of it. Except he never figured out what the trial even was, because he didn't want to figure it out. He was told many times, and he just didn't get it. But even then, so then you take this to the universal level. The trial is a play. There is no seriousness to the law in the end. There cannot be. There is no ultimate conviction. What would that even mean? Really, what would God convict himself of in the end? And if God convicts any of us, they're only convicting themselves. After all, we are parts of God. It's like you convicting your own hand. It doesn't make any sense. So, right, they take him out. They put him on this really awkward position with where they lock their shoulders and wrap their hands around their arms around him like fucking snakes. And they're walking in a single line block together. So whenever they passed under a lamp, Kay tried to see his companions more clearly, as far as was possible. When they were pressed so close together, as in the dim light of his room, this had been hardly possible. Maybe they're tenors, he thought as he saw their big double chins. For those who know very little about music, like I do, tenors are a type of singer, if I'm correct on that. Yeah, the cleanliness of their faces disgusted him. He could see the hands that cleaned them, passing over the corners of their eyes, rubbing at their upper lips, scratching out at the creases of those chins. So let's see, they're pale, they're fat, They're very clean shaved, I suppose. I mean, I could understand, you know, paleness disgusting, fatness disgusting, cleanliness disgusting. Who is this guy? Is he like Gregor Samsa? Yeah, is he in the metamorphosed form where he likes to eat trash? Reference to the Metamorphosis, also by Franz Kafka.
Yeah, terrible translation of the name, but yeah.
Oh, what would be a better translation for that story?
The transformation, probably.
Yeah, that would probably make it too on the nose for people. People might actually get what that story's about if that was the title.
Yeah, Metamorphosis is more referent to Ovid, I guess.
So, all right. When Kay noticed that, he stopped, which meant the others had to stop too. They were at the... he could see the hands that cleaned and passing through their eyes, rubbing their upper lips, scratching out the creases of those shins. Okay. When Kay noticed that, he stopped, which meant the others had to stop too. They were at the edge of an open square, devoid of people but decorated with flower beds. "Why did they send you, of all people?" he cried out, more a shout than a question. The two gentlemen clearly knew no answer to give. They waited, their free arms hanging down like nurses when the patient needs to rest. "I will go no further," said Kay, as if to see what would happen. The gentlemen did not need to make any answer. It was enough that they did not loosen their grip on Kay and tried to move him on, but Kay resisted them. "I'll soon have no need of much strength. I'll use all of it now," he thought. He thought of the flies that tear their legs off. He thought of the flies that tear their legs off, struggling to get free of the flypaper. These gentlemen will have some hard work to do. Just then, Miss Bernstner came up into the square in front of them from the steps leading from a small street at a lower level. It was not certain that it was her, although the similarity was, of course, great. But it did not matter to Kay whether it was certainly her anyway. He just became suddenly aware that there was no point in his resistance. There would be nothing heroic about it if he resisted. If he now caused trouble for these gentlemen, if in defending himself he sought to enjoy his last glimmer of life. He started walking, which pleased the gentlemen, and some of their pleasure conveyed itself to him. Now they permitted him to decide which direction they took, and he decided to take the direction that followed the young woman in front of them, not so much because he wanted to catch up with her, nor even because he wanted to help keep her in sight for as long as possible, but only so that he would not forget the reproach she represented for him. "The only thing I can do now," he said to himself, and his thought was confirmed by the equal length of his own steps with the steps of the two others. "The only thing I can do now is keep my common sense and do what's needed right till the end. I always wanted to go at the world and try and do too much, and even to do for something that was not too cheap. That was wrong with me. Should I now show them I learned nothing from facing a trial for a year? Should I go out like someone stupid? Should I let anyone say after I'm gone that at the start of the proceedings I wanted to end them, and that now that they've ended I want to start them again? I don't want anyone to say that. I'm grateful they sent these unspeaking, uncomprehending men to go with me on this journey, and that it's been left up to me to say what's necessary." I mean, at this point, has he accepted his guilt? I mean, they're very guilty, like, things to say. I mean, and he realizes that somehow he messed up. But as we'll see, it's not clear that he understands what he messed up with. He just knows that he messed up.
Well, he's emptily posturing, so I don't think so.
Yeah. I mean, he already
he's
has
doing a performance because he thinks Miss Bursner's watching. He's showboating one last time.
Huh. I hadn't even thought about that. I can see why one could interpret that, though. Yeah, he doesn't know that it's her. He doesn't even care that it's her. He just wants to believe that it's her, just so that he has one last time to, what is it? What is to was her similarity, but not matter. To Kay, well, it was certainly her anyway. He just became suddenly aware that there was no point of resistance. There would be nothing heroic about if he resisted. If he now crossed over as a gentleman, he started walking.
Why would he care about being heroic or being perceived as heroic? He didn't care what, that person thought. That's how I read it.
Yeah, because supposedly, he has no connections to anybody, but yet, not so much, he followed her, not so much because he wanted to catch up with her, nor even because he wanted to keep her in sight for as long as possible, but only so that he would not forget the reproach she represented for him. So he sees her just merely as a sign of his failure.
Right.
And, it's not that she reproaches him. She's probably moved on with her life and, already forgotten him.
Mm-hmm.
But, for him, she just represents his failure. And, he's one of those people I don't ever want to forget my failure, all these things, who think that the point is just to hold something negative about yourself before you as some kind of, there's people who I need to remind myself never to do that again. It's completely mistaken points of view of whatever it is that one relates to oneself in that way. It's stupid. And it is, in a way, self-masturbatory, self-aggrandizing, just showboating to oneself. It's virtue signaling to nobody but oneself. It's all right. Continuing. Meanwhile, the young woman had turned off into a side street, but Kay could do without her now and let his companions lead him. All three of them now, in complete agreement, went over a bridge in the light of the moon. The two gentlemen were willing to yield to each other the two gentlemen were willing to yield to each little movement made by Kay as he moved slightly towards the edge and directed the group in that direction as a single unit. The moonlight glittered and quivered in the water, which divided itself around a small island covered in a densely piled mass of foliage and trees and bushes. Beneath them, now invisible, there were gravel paths with comfortable benches where Kay had stretched himself out on many summer's days. "I didn't actually want to stop here," he said to his companions, shamed by their compliance with his wishes. Behind Kay's back, one of them seemed to quietly criticize the other for the misunderstanding about stopping, and then they went on. They went on up through several streets with policemen were walking or standing here and there, some in the distance and then some of them very close. One of them with a bushy mustache, his hand on the grip of his sword, seemed to have some purpose in approaching the group, which was hardly unsuspicious. The two gentlemen stopped. The policeman seemed about to open his mouth, and then Kay drove his group forcefully forward. Several times he looked back cautiously to see if the policeman was following. But when they had a corner between themselves and the policeman, Kay began to run, and the two gentlemen, despite being seriously short of breath, had to run with him. In this way, they quickly left the built-up area and found themselves in the fields which, in this part of town, began almost without any transition zone. There was a quarry, empty and abandoned, near a building which was still like those in the city. Excuse me. Here the men stopped, perhaps because this had always been their destination, or because they were too exhausted to run any further. Here they released their hold on Kay, who just waited in silence and took their top hats off while they looked round the quarry and wiped the sweat off their brows with their handkerchiefs. The moonlight lay everywhere in the natural peace that is granted to no other light. Let's see, stuff interesting there. So just going a bit back further. So before he saw the person that looked like Miss Bernster, he had this thought that he's going to, just be difficult for them and struggle against them. Then he sees Miss Bernster and says, oh, well, all this heroic showboating, and he says this out loud to nobody but himself. And if it was Miss Bernster, he probably did hope that she heard him and maybe acknowledged his pathetic existence, but in ceasing to struggle against them, they finally yield to him and let him lead. Which is contradictory, but in a mystical, spiritual literature, this is absolutely common. And ultimately, this is common. This is something concluded in philosophy itself. That when you... actually, this is probably the most famous, as far as people commonly know, like as a common knowledge or a common bit of wisdom, is Taoism. This whole idea that it's what am I thinking of? Well, the phrase that comes to mind first is that the ruler who rules best is the one who people don't see rule. And that means that rather than fight the processes of reality, you go along with them and you figure out how they move and how they flow, and you just nudge the world where the world's already moving. So what you need to do is just find out how to nudge it the right way, and it will go where you want. But it's not you forcing yourself like strongly upon it. You yourself have to engage and move along with it first, and then direct its flow. And then you can't just arbitrarily direct its flow. You can only direct it where it could go anyways. So ceases to struggle against these officers, policemen who are arresting him, or troop members, actors, which he is an actor as well. And ceasing to resist them, they finally comply. This also has to do with the nature of the law. If you resist the law appears as this iron cage for you. If you don't resist the law doesn't really even appear to you as something other than your own will. So right, so he freely follows the woman, does his little monologue, then decides to just randomly stop in front of he leads them on through this little park. And let's see, and K's being typical K, in which, like, what the hell satisfies this guy in the end? If he gets what he wants, he doesn't like it. If he doesn't get what he wants, he doesn't like it. He gets control, and he's sort of displeased that he's the one who's leading them, and that they're just letting him do what he wants. He goes they're in the park. They stop before a bench, and then Kay says, "I didn't actually want to stop here," he said to his companions, shamed by their compliance with his wishes. Supposedly this was a free man who was innocent, and somebody just wants to be free. So you get to call the shots, and then you're shamed by others following what you say. Yeah, it's a pretty good sign of a consciousness of guilt to some extent. Although it's not exactly a consciousness, it's just Kay's intuiting it, feeling it, but he has no consciousness of why. The thing about the policemen, they went up to the several streets where policemen were walking or standing here and there, some in the distance and some very close. One of them with a bushy mustache, his hand on the grip of his sword, seemed to have some purpose in approaching the group, which was hardly suspicious. The two gentlemen stopped. The policeman seemed about to open his mouth, and then Kay drove his group forcefully forward. So, you know, the higher law meets the human law. And they're probably not at odds in this scenario. I mean, what were they stopped him for ultimately? Just, you're being weird. Well, yeah, we're a troupe of actors. What else would they be doing? But that Kay just kind of decides that he doesn't want to deal with it, just moves on. I mean, here Kay had a chance of saying, "Oh, these men have kidnapped me," and all these other things, and you know, he could have been spared, so to say, but he decides not to do anything about it. So now they're in the countryside to some extent. You know, in this way, they quickly left the build-up area and found themselves in the fields, which in this part of town began almost without any transition zone. See, it's lots of places like that around here. Literally, I live at a part of the city where just a couple blocks down, city just ends. Like from then on, it's just like these fields of nothing. Fields and roads and nothing more. The harshness of that transition, or the immediacy of it, is probably symbolic of the very transition of life and death. That as far as the mystical literature goes, esoteric literature, it can be so fine that people sometimes don't notice that they're dead, supposedly. So they're waiting around in the moonlight. After exchanging a few courtesies about who was to carry out the next tasks, the gentlemen did not seem to have been allocated specific functions. One of them went to Kay and took his coat, his waistcoat, and finally his shirt off him. Kay made an involuntary shiver, at which the gentleman gave him a gentle, reassuring tap on the back. Then he carefully folded the things up as if they would still be needed, even if not in the near future. He did not want to expose Kay to the chilly night air without moving though. So he took him under the arm and walked up and down with him a little way while the other gentleman looked around the quarry for a suitable place. When he had found it, he made a sign, and the other gentleman escorted him there. It was near the rock face. There was a stone lying there that had broken loose. The gentleman sat Kay down on the ground, leant him against the stone, and settled his head down on top of it. Despite all the effort they went to, and despite all the cooperation shown by Kay, his demeanor seemed very forced and hard to believe. So one of the gentlemen asked the other to grant him a short time before he put Kay in position by himself. But even that did nothing to make it better. In the end, they left Kay in a position that was far from the best as the ones they had tried so far. Then when the gentleman opened his frock coat, and from beneath, hanging on a belt stretched across his waistcoat, he withdrew a long, thin, double-edged butcher's knife, which he held up in the light to test its sharpness. What the hell does that even look like? I've never seen a double-edged butcher's knife.
Yeah, no, that doesn't sound normal. Apparently they exist,
because they pretty much don't really exist. The closest regular thing is it's a cleaver.
Yeah.
Just a cleaver that's sharpened on both edges. Okay.
Yeah, I'm seeing a cleaver that's sharpened on both sides, but they have different functions. Weird.
So I mean, this whole thing it is playing out exactly like a play. I mean, they're figuring out what looks best. They're trying to like make him look a certain way, and K's not getting the look that they want, and so even in the end they just decide, okay, fuck it. It's like they say, it doesn't look believable. His demeanor seemed very forced and hard to believe. So you gotta look right when you're gonna get killed, So one of the gentlemen asked the other to grant him a short time while he put Kay in position by himself, but even that did nothing to make it better. In the end, they left Kay in a position that was far from the best of the ones they had tried so far. Then when the gentleman opened his frock coat, double the butcher's knife, which he held up in the light to test its sharpness. The repulsive courtesies began once again. One of them passed the knife over Kay to the other, who then passed it back over Kay to the first. Kay now knew it would be his duty to take the knife as it was passed from hand to hand above him and thrust it into himself. But he did not do it. Instead, he twisted his neck, which was still free, and looked around. He was not able to show his full worth, was not able to take all the work from the official bodies. He lacked the rest of the strength he needed, and his final shortcoming was the fault of whoever had denied it to him. And as he looked around, he saw the top floor of the building next to the quarry. He saw how light flickered on, and the two halves of a window opened out. Somebody, made weak and thin by the height in the distance, leant suddenly far out from it and stretched his arms out even further. Who was that? A friend? A good person? Somebody who was taking part? Somebody who wanted to help? Was he alone? Was it everyone? Would anyone help? Were there objections that had been forgotten? There must have been some. The logic cannot be refuted, but someone who wants to live will not resist it. Where was the judge he'd never seen? Where was the high court he had never reached? He raised both hands and spread out all his fingers. But the hands of one of the gentlemen were laid on Kay's throat, while the other pushed the knife deep into his heart and twisted it there twice. As his eyesight failed, Kay saw the two gentlemen, cheek by cheek, close in front of his face, watching the result. Like a dog, he said, and it was as if the shame of it should outlive him. And that's it. So, going back a little bit. The thing about them passing the knife over him, and that Kay somehow knew that, like, there was some kind of expectation that he should have taken the knife and plunged it into himself, and stabbed himself. Now I'm looking at some of these double-edged butchers, and I don't know how the fuck you could stab yourself with that shit. The angles just don't work very well. Especially with the double-edged, it's kind of weird. But alright. Kay now knew it would be his duty to take the knife as it passed from hand to hand above him and thrust it into himself. But he did not do it. Instead, he twisted his neck, which was still free, and looked around. So, the thing about him ending his own life being the proper thing makes sense. I mean, insofar as once here, it's no longer about just Kay's guilt, but just guilt as such, which in the Christian sense is sin. If you've gotten so far off the path that you've come to this point where the judgment is coming, you might have a bit of reflection upon it, accept that you are guilty in the end, and I suppose it's a matter of honor, which is also a matter of respecting yourself, and also a matter of respecting the law. In having respect enough to say, I will do this myself because I know I deserve it, and I acknowledge it. But he doesn't do this. But he did not do it. Instead, he twisted his neck, which was still free, and looked around. So he knows what's coming, and rather than focusing on that, he starts doing his typical thing and kind of having a bit of indifference to it, it seems. Not paying full attention. He was not able to show his full worth, was not able to take all the work from the official bodies. He lacked the rest of the strength he needed, and this final shortcoming was the fault of whoever had denied it to him. Till the very end, he cannot take responsibility for anything. Throughout the whole story, we've seen that this is a huge part of his failings, and he never learns. So as he looked around, he saw the top of the floor of the building next to the quarry. He saw how a light flickered on, and two halves of a window opened out. Somebody made weak and thin by the height and the distance, leant suddenly far out from it and stretched his arms out even further. Who was that? A friend? A good person? Somebody who was taking part? Somebody who wanted to help? Was he alone? Was it everyone? Would anyone help? Were there objections that had been forgotten? There must have been some. The logic cannot be refuted, but someone who wants to live will not resist it. Where was the judge he'd never seen? Where was the high court he had never reached? He raised both hands and spread out all his fingers. So probably the person who was there was part of the court. Part of the court, that was everybody in the court was trying to help him, except for even the priest was trying to help him, except he wasn't going to do anything externally for him. He helped him he tried to help him by just telling him what the facts were of the trial. But ultimately, would one say that there's any difference between somebody who does that for you and a friend, a good person, somebody who's taking part? I mean, if they're trying to help you, they're taking part. And if they're taking part, they're trying to help you in certain ways. Even the people who were stumbling blocks for him were there only as opportunities for him to rectify himself, and he just didn't take it. Was he alone? Was it everyone? Would anyone help? That's a weird one. Somebody opens up the door, leans out, reaches out with their hands, and he asks, was it everyone? Not quite sure how to interpret that. You just go from this very singular radically to just like, is it somebody? Is it everyone? Or maybe it's a way that, considering that he's asking, is it a friend? Is it a good person? Somebody who's taking part? Somebody who wanted to help? Was he alone? Was this the single person who had been trying to help him all along? Was it everyone that tried to help him all along? And then he still asks, would anyone help? Moving away from the question, was it everyone that was trying to help, to like, In the end, regardless of that, would anyone help? Would their objections have been forgotten? There must have been some. And there I think his train of thought turns back to himself. For a moment he thinks about somebody else who might have helped him. Seems to have a moment, just a slight moment, where he wonders if it was everyone that was trying to help him all along. Maybe. I'm reading into this, but sparse text right here. As for the objections, did he forget any objections? No, not really. And indeed, he could have made no objections. The court doesn't care for your defense. And it doesn't matter, because what you say is not what matters. So, the logic cannot be refuted, but someone who wants to live will not resist it. What's that referring to? Because following what's being talked about, it's not actually clear. Although I can make some generalized relationships. The logic of what's going on, the logic of the law, the logic of the trial as a whole, all of it cannot be refuted. But someone who wants to live will not resist it. And it makes sense. And if it's strange that he's thinking this, because it's true. But clearly he doesn't understand it. That you cannot fight the trial. You cannot defend yourself in this trial. You cannot defend yourself against the court. The only way to win is to not resist. And generalizing to the actual concept of the trial, the only way to win at life is not to fight it. It does, and this is not a call to passivity. Like, that's not what this means. What it means is that you don't resist what is incontrovertible and what is consequential. If the facts are the facts, they're going to, the truth is going to get you in the end. And the truth might be things that are unpleasant. And the truth might even be things that are not true for a moment, which appear as true. But the best thing, and really the only thing you can do to save yourself from all of it, is just do not fight it. Flow with it, but do not get submerged in it. And this is exactly what Kay never did. Here again, he gets lost in the formalities. Where was the judge he'd never seen? Where was the high court he had never reached? It was never about the court. The court is merely a formal appearance. Its appearance has ultimately nothing to do with how the trial runs itself. So he raised both hands and spread out all his fingers. A bit too late, and a bit too late, and still not enough. He's trying to reach to this stranger whom he does not know up on the second floor, who's also reaching down for him. Oh, that mirrors what the babies were doing. Well, I don't know if it's babies. Don't remember if it's babies or
It just said children.
Yeah, just children.
Right. I mean, they were in a playpen, so like young.
Yeah, probably toddlers.
Yeah, toddlers.
So this mirrors what the children were doing, except they weren't divided by this huge expanse of space, and they weren't at the end of their lives, at which point, reaching out, even if you manage it, it's just going to be for a fleeting moment and it's done. So, too little, too late. And yet again, it was still in the wrong way. As the priest told Kay, that he kept trying he kept trusting in strangers for advice and for help, and that it's not the help that he needed. And part of the implication of that is that the help he needed is that he should have turned to the people who actually cared about him, who actually knew him as a person. Like, Mrs. Grubach, his landlady, who cared about him.
She would never criticize him, though. She held him in too high regard.
Yeah, she cared about him like a son, but she never criticized him. His uncle, who cared about him, I suppose, probably pretty distant though.
Yeah.
Even his work mates, like the other guy in the office next to him and his boss, the president of the bank, cared about him to a significant extent. They noticed his trial and they helped him. They took the load of work off him and didn't fire him or castigate him or anything. So there were people whom he did know, whom he could have opened up to, and he didn't. It is an error that people make. I know this from personal experience, and I think most people find this out. I don't know how common this is, but I'm pretty liberal about talking about my life, although I don't talk about it much. Unless somebody asks about it, I don't talk about it much. But I don't keep much in. But there's a difference between telling certain things to strangers and telling certain things to a friend, somebody whom you'll see again, somebody who you have in your life constantly. There's a difference between telling them something deep within yourself and telling a stranger. And that's what Kay always wanted to do. He never wanted to let anyone in to his life. He liked the capacity to pick up relationships and drop them at the drop of a hat. So, right, then they stab him, twisted it there twice. Kay says, like a dog, he said. It was as if the shame of it should outlive him. Like a dog, how? Because he didn't have the guts to do it himself. So, he couldn't bring himself to ultimately fully admit to his guilt till the very end. Till this very end, he never admitted it, ultimately. Despite the fact that, for a moment there, behind the woman that looked like Miss Bernstner, he talks about it emptily, but in the end it was only an empty uttering. He didn't really mean it. He didn't really ever realize that he was guilty of anything, or rather, he never accepted that he was.
Does the shame outlive him? He feels that way. But I don't know, at least my immediate thoughts are, nobody really gives a shit. So nobody's ashamed of him.
Well, I'll give you an interpretation of this, where it does. So to finish the thing about the dog, so one, it's like a dog, not only because he has failed to take responsibility and be a man, so to say, be a proper person, a human being, and take the judgment into his own hand and deliver it. This is not only at this point in the book. This is true for the entire story. Kay is being like a dog the entire story.
Mm-hmm.
He has given up. He gave up his agency from the very beginning, which is his agency, despite the fact that he's in denial of it. He never took responsibility. That's not what a human being does. It's not what a person does, properly speaking. If you are really at that capacity, you don't do what Kay did, and you don't you don't treat it casually in the sense of something that doesn't matter. He allowed so many things to just happen out of pretending that he was indifferent. Well, but that's what an animal does. Ultimately. An animal is led to the slaughter.
And he's put down like a dog, from his perspective.
Yep. It was as if the shame of it should outlive him. Well, here's how the shame could outlive him. It's not like anybody wouldn't find out that Joseph K. died. And it wasn't as if, given the way that the story has shown things move around and people speak, people would find out that it was because of the trial. That, this was how the trial ended. That this was his conviction. And if you remember, his thing from his uncle probably take this as a great shame. So the shame would outlive him, at least in that perspective. Certainly other people in his family and other people who knew him would probably look on him with great pity rather than shame. And indeed, I think most people would probably look... Well, actually, no. I'm thinking that more about now. Back then, probably it would just be a general thing of shame.
Yeah, I think that'd be all that's left of his legacy, his memory.
Yeah, because he didn't do anything. He didn't accomplish anything others.
I mean, that's all we have of him from this story. That's all we're left with is just shame.
Hello?
You guys are done?
No?
No.
Your W cut out. Hello?
All right, hello.
You're back.
Okay. So actually, let's cut this off. This will conclude the commentary on the specific parts of the book, and then we can talk about the general book in a second part. So, right, for those of you who have listened through this all along, congratulations. You have basically received an entire course on this book. There's nothing like this on the internet. And while I did have issues in the very first 4 chapters, I think, we finally did get them sorted out. And I'm happy. What we've ended with. Could be a bit better. Could be cleaned up a bit. But I have succeeded. I have succeeded. We have succeeded in putting out a view of this book, which is sorely lacking. Which I will be surprised if this gets any high amount of viewership. I mean, it's not like book reviews and analyses are even that popular to begin with, but
well, the readings will probably not get that many views, but that other video you're making, I hope to see that succeed. I hope to see that become the video on the trial on YouTube, but we'll see about that.
Well, we're not... I already knew this. There was no way that we were the first ones to figure out this reading, and we're not.
Of course.
It's just a really rare one, really, really rare. And most people who notice that he is guilty obviously don't take the time to literally go in as much detail as we did and figure out like the depths of how true this is and what it really means. Because I was been looking on Google stuff for reviews of this, and just like one, there's not that many, amazingly, and what few there are, like academically, most of them are indeed the typical trash, bureaucracy and shit.
Which is untenable. Complete.
Yeah, which we have shown definitively is just completely untenable. So I've actually found mostly posts on on Reddit, where for every time that somebody discusses like this book, there's always some single comment that brings up this fact that like somebody says like, well, my interpretation was that obviously he was a terrible person and guilty, but people get attacked for saying that. One, they're usually ignored, and when they're responded to, a lot of people just attack that and say like, that's just completely wrong. And obviously, I mean, what the hell kind of book are these people reading?
I don't know.
But anyways, this is it for the chapter by chapter commentary. Don't be Joseph K. I'm certainly doing my best to not be.
Yeah.
See you around.